Hey, welcome back everybody, or if you're new to my channel, thanks for tuning in. A couple days ago I had a comment from one of my subscribers asking for woodworking basics. I'm sorry, but I've been at this game for about 35 years, so I kind of forgot that maybe some people are just now getting into woodworking. So I thought what I would do is, the most important thing of any woodworking project is knowing how to select the piece of wood based on what you're looking to do. So that's what I thought I'd go over today, is just some of the woodworking selection basics that you need to know in order to do a project. So stay with me, let's dive right in. Okay, one of the first criteria you really have to think about when you're selecting a piece of wood is this going to be an interior project or something outside that's going to have to weather the elements? And that's pretty important when you're selecting wood, because you can end up with a really beautiful piece and put it outside, and if it's the wrong kind of wood, it can get ugly real quick. So that's how I thought I'd break it up today. I'd break it up starting with the exterior wood first, because there's fewer selections there, and then we'll dive more into the interior wood selections. Let's take a look at a couple of the options for exterior wood that are probably available at the box stores. So we'll start off with those two, and then I'll just kind of talk to some of the other stuff that may be available at a specialty wood supplier. So first up is probably the number one choice for exterior wood, and that would be Western red cedar. And this is what it looks like in a 1x dimension. Actually, I think this has been milled down a little bit smaller than 1x. But now this piece actually has a pretty sizable knot on it, but that's not characteristic of most Western red cedar. It's normally pretty knot free. Now, one problem with sourcing Western red cedar right now is most of Western red cedar comes out of Western British Columbia in Canada, and a few years ago they had a strike up there, and so they didn't produce any Western red cedar for a while. So we had some incense cedar introduced from China. Incense cedar does not have the same durability quality as Western red, so if you're looking at Western red cedar or looking for Western red cedar, make sure you're actually looking at something that has a reddish color like this does. That's going to be a telltale sign that that's a Western red cedar instead of an incense cedar. Now, another less expensive and more readily available option for exterior wood that I would recommend is KDAT, K-D-A-T, which stands for Kiln Dried After Treatment. And that normally goes by the brand name of Yellowwood, so you've probably seen that before. Now, don't confuse this with the wet treated wood that you see at the box stores. The problem with the wet treated is it will check, twist, bend as it dries out, and you don't want that in your project. So that's another option for exterior wood. Now, if you're looking to do some kind of a plywood project exterior, you probably will have to go to a lumber store. I haven't seen this product in any of the box stores, but you'll have to go to a larger wholesale lumber store to get it. It's called MDO, Medium Density Overlay. Now, that comes in various thicknesses, 1/2 inch through 3/4, and I think it even comes up to 1 3/4 inches. But if you're unfamiliar with this, drive down a highway. If you see a big wooden sign, the big green signs that they have on the side of the road, if it's made out of wood, more than likely that's MDO, Medium Density Overlay. And the nice thing about that is it has Douglas fir veneers, so that's kind of weather resistant material. But then it is skinned on both sides with fiberglass impregnated paper, and that's what makes it waterproof. So very good. I've used that material a lot of times for doing exterior trim elements that had to do arches and things like that. Very good product for that. So that's another item. Now, if you get into some of the exotics like deck materials, there's a product out of South America called EPE, E-P-E, and that gets pretty pricey, but that is a very straight grain wood, and it's also very resistant to, bugs and warping and things like that exterior. And again, you would have to go to a specialty wood place to get that material. But anyway, that's the 3 basics for exterior wood. Now let's go ahead and dive into some of the interior choices. Okay, let's start off with the one that's probably the most popular stain grade material that you're going to see at the box stores. This is an example of red oak. This is on hardness level. This is a pretty hard wood and generally used in a stain application. And it's generally quarter sawn, which means they take it not out of the center of the tree, but kind of out toward the end. You can see how the grain kind of runs at an angle there. And then another one that you may see at the box stores, this is maple. And you can see this is actually a piece of trim. But notice how the grain is kind of wavy, and it's a lighter wood. And it's hard to see how the grain runs on that end because it's not cut. Very tight. This can actually be a stain grade or a paint grade. A lot of times I will see it used in cabinets for a paint grade wood, because maple can be a little bit inconsistent on how it takes stain. Sometimes it can be kind of blotchy. And then another one that we'll see is select pine, or domestically this can be Douglas fir or spruce. But as you can see, I think you can see in the label here, this is a product of New Zealand. And this is something that I picked up at one of the box stores. So this one I use for kind of an inexpensive stain grade. You can see the grain is quite a bit larger, but this is a very stable wood. It tends not to warp or check. But a lot of times I'll use this for like a paint grade project. And again, this is all interior wood that I'm showing you right now. And then here's another sample of something from New Zealand. This is labeled as a craft board, but this is real similar to the maple that I showed you before. And I've stained this particular species of wood, and it actually takes stain really well, but typically I'll use this for a paint grade just because the cost of it. Now here's one that I use for a paint grade all the time. This is poplar, and some people refer to it as olive poplar. And you can see why it's kind of a greenish color. But sometimes you can get poplar that is real clear, almost looks like maple. And so take your chances on if you want to stain this or not. The green will really affect your stain color if you go to stain it, but it does take stain well. It will definitely change the color of your stain if you go over the green portions of the wood. So that's poplar. And then you may see pre-primed wood at the box stores. And one thing I wanted to show you on that, generally it's going to be finger jointed together. And you can see that right here, how the grain changes. This is where the finger joint is right here. So that's not going to be as stable of a piece. Like if you're looking for like a load bearing quality, that's not good for that. But if you're just doing like a straight run, this is a very stable product. And I've seen some builders use this exterior. I would not do that. It's a pine product. It's really not meant for exterior. And then of course you've got plywood. This is a piece of 1/2-inch maple veneered plywood, cabinetry plywood. So that's good for making larger, projects with larger surface areas. This is a little step stool I created for a little kid that I had here in the shop one night, and I had some 3/4-inch plywood, and he wasn't quite tall enough to reach the table, so I threw this little dude together in about 5 minutes. And again, this is just an interior cabinetry plywood that I used for it, but it's strong enough to hold my 240 pounds also. So real strong design, made out of just cabinetry plywood. This is definitely something that you could probably find scraps in a scrap pile at a new build job site. Okay, the next question you might ask is, where can I source these different woods? And as I already mentioned, you can pick them up at the box stores, Home Depot, Lowe's. You can pick them up at a wholesale wood supplier in Texas, 84 Lumber, those kinds of places, Builder's First Source. But if you're just starting off with woodworking and you tend to do smaller projects when you just start off, find where they're building some houses around you. Because if you get in with the building superintendents, a lot of times they'll let you go to the job site after hours and pick through their trash bin. There's always going to be a trash bin in front of every house. And you can pick up, pieces of 2x4, 2x6. And if the trim guys have been working on the house, you can even pick up some pretty nice trim pieces every now and then for your projects. So that's basically free. And another source, if you've got a cabinet maker or a window maker in your area, you can go to them because they always have fall-offs, or basically pieces that they can't use because they're not long enough, but they're perfect for beginning woodworkers. Again, you can reduce your cost by finding some of those sources that are throwing away pieces that aren't of any use to them, but are perfectly good for someone that's just starting off on woodworking. Well, now that I've kind of talked about the different kinds of woods for interior and exterior projects, there's one thing left. How do you select a piece of wood? The first thing you want to do is look for a piece of wood that has fairly straight grain. You don't want anything that has a little bit of a run to the grain, because that can negatively affect your project when you start working with the wood. Typically, if the grain is kind of wild in the piece, once you start working on it with tools, it will tend to shift, side to side or twist, and you don't want that. So straighter grain, the better. Number two, you want to take a look to make sure that it doesn't have any twist or warpage to it. Now, what you want to do is you want to hold the board on end like this here, and you want to look right down the edge. Now, this is a piece of 1/2-inch plywood that I ripped, so this line is going to be pretty decent. But what you want to look for, well, actually, see how the lettering on this is a little bit off kilter? Well, just assume that that's this edge. If there's a little bit of a twist in the board will look like this with the other end of it on the ground. So you don't want any kind of twist. And then looking down the edge, you want to make sure that that line is just razor straight. Sometimes it might have like a bend to the right or a bend to the left. That means that it's gonna check when you start working with it. In other words, it's gonna just take off and be warped like crazy on your project. So that's how you want to look at a piece of wood at the box store or wherever you're getting it, just to make sure it's a straight piece of wood. And you want to make sure that the grain is not raised up too much on it either, because that's going to be more to work at, with sandpaper and things like that on your project. So anyway, I wish I had a piece of, warped wood that I could show you, but unfortunately I don't right now. Now, okay, here's one thing to look at too. Here I'm holding the board on the edge, and you see how it kind of takes off to the right at the end there? That would be a board that I would pass on. But since this is 1/2-inch plywood, I'll use this for something else, and I'll be able to cut that out. So, and that's another thing too. If you're at the box store and you see a bunch of wood that is checked or out of shape like this, you may be able to go to the pro desk and bargain with them. They may actually sell that material to you for less just because it's in bad condition. So that's a pro tip. Just, try that out sometime. Well, that kind of wraps things up for the basics of selecting a piece of wood for your project. You might notice that my shirt's a little bit wetter than when I started this video. Well, that's a consequence of living in Texas. So it's summertime in Texas, and it gets a little warm down here. So, but anyway, now that I know some beginners are actually tuning into the channel too, I will definitely have segments that are kind of steered more toward a beginner. So stay tuned. And if you like this video today, please hit subscribe and like. And again, give me comments, because this whole video was created based on a comment that one of my subscribers put out there. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.